Hello, my name is Agnieszka Pikulicka-Wilczewska and this is Turan Tales, a podcast about Central Asia. It delves into stories of people, politics, social change and more, and is part of my newsletter which you can support on Substack. Welcome and be my guest in the journey to Central Asia. Hi listeners. Today we'll look at a story that I personally find very frustrating. The rights of Central Asian migrants in Russia. According to the Russian Interior Ministry, there are about 10.5 million people from Uzbekistan, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan working in the country. It has long been clear that they experience derogatory treatment, humiliation and racism on a daily basis. The situation has further deteriorated since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. In September of that year, the Duma, Russia's lower chamber of parliament, passed a law fast-tracking citizenship in exchange for military service. Around the same time, Moscow's Mayor Sergey Sobyanin launched a targeted enlistment campaign aimed specifically at migrants. According to a report by Hochu Zhit, I Want to Live, so a project by Ukraine's defense ministry, more than 3,000 Central Asians are now serving in Russia's military. The numbers recorded in the Hochu Zhit report are the following. 1,110 Uzbek nationals have been enlisted to serve in the Russian military, of whom 109 have been confirmed killed. This is the case of 931 Tajiks who have been enlisted and 196 died. 360 Kyrgyz citizens enlisted and 38 dead. 170 Turkmens enlisted, of whom 27 have died. And finally, 661 citizens of Kazakhstan enlisted, of whom 78 were killed in combat. These numbers have likely changed since May when the report was published. But that's not the point. Our conversation today will center on a documentary directed by my dear friend and one of the journalists whose work and courage I truly admire, Shahida Tulaganova. She recently released a film about Bahrom Hamroyev, a well-known human rights defender from Uzbekistan who spent years working with and supporting Central Asian migrants in Russia. Hamroyev was arrested at the onset of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine on suspicion of being part of Hizb ut-Tahrir, a non-violent Islamist organization banned in Russia, a charge he denies. He was sentenced to 13 years and 9 months for allegedly justifying terrorism and organizing the activities of a terrorist organization. I've included a link to the movie's trailer in this week's newsletter. Before we begin, a few words about Shahida Tulaganova. She is an Emmy-nominated filmmaker, born and raised in Uzbekistan and currently based in London. Shahida began her journalism career with the BBC in 1996. Since then, she has reported from Syria, Afghanistan, Ukraine, Palestine, and Somalia. Her recent films focus on the situation of children during Russia's war against Ukraine and were published by ITV. Welcome to Turan Talks. Hi, Shahida.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for accepting my invitation. And as you know, I have invited you mainly to talk about the film you've recently made for Current Time, Spirit Untamed, about Bahrom Hamroyev's story. So if you can tell us, who is Bahrom Hamroyev?
Bahrom Hamroyev is a human rights defender and now a political prisoner, sadly. He was born and raised in Uzbekistan, and he was a political activist during the fall of the Soviet Union and in early 90s. And he was Uzbek national sense of it. He was promoting the Uzbek language, freedom of press, etc., etc. But unfortunately, the power in Uzbekistan in early 90s, right after the collapse of the Soviet Union, was seized by the former communists. And we're talking about Islam Karimov, the dictator, who actually started crashing the opposition. And whoever could run, they did. Many people ended up in the West. Many people ended up in prisons in Uzbekistan. Bahrom Khamroev left to Moscow. And then he stayed in Russia ever since, So therefore, it's why even though he's Uzbek, he is a Russian citizen, and he was Russian Uzbek human rights defender for years, basically defending the rights of migrant workers and Muslims in Russia.
Do you know him personally?
Well, ironically, we've never met in person because, I never went to Russia, and he was mainly based there. But over the years, we communicated a lot. I interviewed him a lot of times, and it always felt like we met in person, but we never did. Because as a journalist, of course, I was also following the cases of persecution of Muslims in Russia as well as migrant workers, So we spoke a lot about this, but we never met in person.
So what happened to him? Can we start from the end of the story? What happened to him?
On the day of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine on 24th of February 2022, early in the morning, FSB stormed his apartment in Moscow and arrested him on the charges of him being a member of Hizb ut-Tahrir.
What is Hizb ut-Tahrir? Can we explain to the listeners who might not be familiar?
Yeah, Hizb ut-Tahrir is a religious organization, a movement, whatever you call it, which originates years ago, decades ago, somewhere in the Middle East, and then it actually made it to the West and made it to Russia and former Soviet Union. I always consider them as sectarian some sort because they're a close-knit of group. And unlike many other Islamic religious movements and parties, they never promote violence.
Yes, yeah.
And this is the fundamental difference between them and any other organization. Hizb ut-Tahrir is banned pretty much in all Central Asian countries, and it was banned not long ago in Russia as well, for the reasons of them being involved in terrorism, which is absolute nonsense because they never did. I mean, probably this is the only organization which never been accused in terrorist attacks anywhere in the world. I'm not defending them, just stating the facts. Bahrom Khamroev was never a member of Hizb ut-Tahrir. But the authorities in Russia really clinged into that because years ago, he was invited to Eid celebrations in Moscow. Actually, it was official Eid celebration. Everything was permitted, allowed by the Russian authorities. I think it happened in Moscow. And he was invited as a guest. Obviously, this whole thing was organized by Hizb ut-Tahrir. And he was asked to do the, welcome speech. Which he did, congratulated with Eid and et cetera, et cetera. And that gave an excuse to the police, to FSB, to accuse him of being a member of Hizb ut-Tahrir. Claim that he always rejected. I confirmed it with his lawyer, Timofey Shirokov, and his wife, Zuhra Khamroeva, that he never been a member of this organization. But nevertheless, this was an official accusation which was put to him after he was arrested on 24th of February 2022 and subsequently charged with terrorism and sentenced to almost 14 years in prison.
We know that the charges have been trumped up, obviously. We know that he's never been involved in terrorism. But why, you think, the Russian authorities wanted him out so badly that they decided to create those charges?
The case of Bahrom Khamroev is tightly connected to the Memorial Human Rights Center. And Russian authorities were going after Memorial Human Rights Center for years. Bahrom Khamroev was a member of this center, and he used their premises, etc. They couldn't really, to close down Memorial, which is like organization highly valued and respected. You need to have serious charges. They couldn't find anything, so they actually made Bahrom and his quote-unquote association with terrorism as the paramount case to finally shut down Memorial Human Rights Center 10 days actually after his arrest. Why they're doing so? I mean, because the full-scale invasion was planned by the Russian authorities way in advance. Come on, we kind of understand that. And in the wake of this invasion, they really wanted to get rid of anyone who could voice their protests and who could be a center of political dissent, so to speak. That's why Memorial was shut down. That's why a lot of activists were put in prison, including Bahrom Hamroyev. And so people could not congregate. And if you remember, in late February 2022, there were some protests in Russia against the war in Ukraine. But then they were brutally dispersed, and lots of people were put in a prison. So Russian authorities wanted to clamp down on political dissent, and Bahrom was part of this plan. His function actually in Russia for years, and FSB and everyone else, police, knew that he was solely dedicating his human rights work to defend the rights of labor migrants in Russia. Labor migrants from Central Asia, mainly from Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. And he relentlessly was fighting with the police who were, detaining them for no reason and beating them up. And he was defending these people. And only 2 years after the full-scale invasion, 2 years after Bahrom was jailed, I now understand the sinister plan of silencing him because more and more labor migrants are now forced to sign a military contract with Russian MOD, Ministry of Defense, and go to fight in Ukraine.
So let's go back a little bit and look at the big picture. So why are so many people from Central Asia going to Russia? Because according to statistics, there are around 4 million Central Asians currently living and working in Russia, which is a very huge amount of people. So what brings Central Asians to Russia? And then we will move to day treatment in Russia.
Central Asians, especially people from Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, less so from Kazakhstan, were going for labor works in Russia for years, just because the region itself is quite poor. There is too much workforce. I mean, the population is quite young, but there is not enough workplaces for them in their own countries. Also, the problem with Central Asia that it's non-democratic, obviously, it's full of nepotism and corruption. It's very difficult to people to find a decent job. And even if they find the job, the salary is not enough to feed the family. So therefore, they were kind of forced to go to Russia, which offers huge work opportunities. Look at Russia, it's big. And there were lots of workplaces available in construction mainly, where Central Asians used to work and still work. Service sector. If you go to Russia, like I was in Russia in 2023, was in Moscow and St. Petersburg, and when I went to the airport, I didn't see a single Russian working there. Mm-hmm. All these works, labor, minor works, which Russians probably won't do, are done by Central Asians. Any shop you go to, you see Central Asians, salespeople, waiters, airport service people. I mean, Russia depends on them because they don't want to do works which Central Asians are doing. And unfortunately, a lot of them are not protected. Mm-hmm. It's only Tajikistan and Russia have this agreement about labor work, migrants. The rest, none. So when they come there, they have to pay bribes to the police to get some sort of registration or propiska, permanent residence kind of stamp. Ridiculous. And they have to apply for the right to work. And it's done too, but it's done with bribes as well. So you see, a lot of people are profiting from people coming there. Normally, these people just rent a room, in the flat, 5, 6 people in a row, and they only work. They work, they sleep, they go back to work, and they're harassed. And any single time there is any excuse, the police can harass them just to extort some money as a bribe. So it's hard.
And there is also a very high level of racism among Russians towards Central Asians, which I don't really understand where it comes from, but it probably has some colonial undercurrents to it. But yeah, the life of Central Asians in Russia is not easy. And what was Bahram exactly doing? How he was helping migrants?
So when migrants are detained by the police, right, and if they cannot figure out how to, bribe or whatever, I'm talking about Uzbeks now, for example, they are sent to the so-called migration centers, which are de facto prisons. In these migration centers, the stuff is proceed, and basically they have to be deported back home. To be deported back home, the consulate of their respective country, in this case Uzbekistan, would have to come and kind of rescue them. But Uzbek consulate never shows appearance there. So Bahram was going there with all the documents, visiting them, bringing them medicine if needed, and fighting their case in the courts for them, together sometimes with the lawyers. I have to tell you that he done a lot of work in saving the lives of dozens of Uzbek political activists who were running from the Karimov regime. We know how brutal this regime was and persecution of any dissent. And these young lads, were escaping to Russia, seeking protection or, refugee status or whatever. Often, initial response of the Russian authorities was to deny them of this and put them in these migration centers. And that's where Bahram was coming along, fighting the case in Russian courts and in some cases in the European Court for Human Rights, and winning these cases. He actually was saving people's lives. And of course, he was disliked by the Russian authorities and Uzbek authorities because he was an enemy of the both. But he's this kind of principled man who, when he sees a wrong, he just won't stand and look. He will go and fight this wrong. And for him, every single life which would have to be protected or saved was important. For example, back in 2014, when ISIS, the Islamic State, if those who don't remember, was ruling, quote unquote, parts of Iraq and Syria, a lot of Muslims from Russia were disappearing on the grounds of that they were basically kidnapped by the Russian FSB. And he was the one who was, looking for them. Writing appeals, etc. So, he's done a lot of work. And, especially with migrant workers who's, for example, there's a group of migrants who go and work in construction. So the construction company doesn't sign papers with them, saying, we can't really sign papers with you, you're here illegal, etc., etc. So these people work for a month, for 2 months, and they're not paid. Who are they going to go to? Nobody's listening to them. They find Bahram. And Bahram would go and argue with the, managers, and actually, in many cases, forcing them to pay what they have to pay to the workers. So now without him, there's no one to defend them.
So what is happening in Russia now when it comes to the situation of migrant workers and the recruitment to fight on the front lines in Ukraine? How is it organized?
Like everything else in Russia, it's organized pretty well. So the scheme is the following. you have a migrant who probably doesn't have right paperwork, right? So you stop the migrant in the street, you check his documents are not right, you take him to police station. And the police station, the migrant is told, okay, we're either going to send you to detention center or you sign the military contract and you go and fight in Ukraine. And after a year of serving in Ukraine, of fighting in Ukraine, you will be given Russian passport, Russian citizenship, and full benefits of being Russian citizen. Now, a lot of them are frightened and they sign the contract. But the thing is that even if they don't sign the contract, when they're sent to deportation center, another bunch of people from MOD or police is going to come and say, so you have to sign it. So there's no way about it. They have to sign it. So they do sign, sent to Ukraine, and guess what? This trick of getting Russian passport, Russian citizenship within a year is not going to work because they killed way before that. You know, we don't know how many people are killed. I mean, Ukrainian colleagues from the project Hochu Zhit, I Want to Leave, they have some numbers of citizens of Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan who died. But this is the numbers we know. Now, Russia is, you see, in the beginning of the war, they were recruiting prisoners, right? Pretty much prisoners finished. Now they have to use the migrant workers. And it comes, the directive is coming from high authorities like Russia's investigative committee chief, Alexander Bastrykin, who is very racist in his statements towards migrants. I mean, it's very weird to me living in the West for many years to hear an official speaking with such arrogance, racism, and hatred to a group of people. So he took his mission to recruit as many migrants as possible to fight in Ukraine.
And it's official, right? It's official. It's not some conspiracy theory. It is what he says officially.
It is what he says officially, and he says it repeatedly. Lately, he spoke early, like a couple of months ago, he spoke at Pittsburgh Economic Forum, which is a big gathering, a big thing in Russia. And again, he said that we don't need this, he calls migrants, irreplaceable specialists. They're taking jobs from the Russians. Look, he says, when you go to St. Petersburg and you want to visit the palace, right? Who is meeting you there? Russians? No, migrants. You know, and it's really awful to hear things like this, as if they're not people, they're some sort of cockroaches. He said, we don't need them in the service sector. We need them in the front lines. We need strong hands to dig trenches. And in the same statement, he said, we already sent about 30,000 migrants to, as he called, special military operation, which I call a war. And he said, we already identified another 80,000 people who already registered in the military commissariats. So you calculate, another 80,000 are going to go to Ukraine. They will be forced to go to Ukraine. That's a big number. And the sad thing is that when I was discussing it with my Ukrainian friends, the military friends, and I said 80,000 plus 30,000, and I was told, look, they're going to be finished within 2 months. And what are these people doing in Ukraine? They don't even want to be in Ukraine.
You also managed to speak to Uzbeks who fought in Ukraine. They were prisoners of war. I mean, they are prisoners of war who had been caught by Ukrainians. And you spoke to them online, as I understand?
Yes.
Can you tell me what this conversation looked like and what they told you?
I was very grateful to Vladimir Zolkin, who gave this opportunity. To be honest, I didn't expect it because normally he's publishing everything on his Telegram or YouTube channel. But I just thought, can I talk to them? Because I want to understand their motives. Well, the same story as I told you earlier in this conversation. Both of them, one of them committed some crime. I think he beat up someone. So he was taken to the detention center and he was offered to sign contract. The other one too, they're both from Uzbekistan. They spent years in Russia, working, and obviously one of them even has a flat in St. Petersburg. They were there part legally, part not, but they signed the contract. Now I asked them one question. Why are you there? Why couldn't you serve your sentence? Why did you come to Ukraine? They said, and they both said, well, we want Russian citizenship. They said they're going to give us Russian passport. I'm like, why would you need Russian passport? They're like, well, because we don't want to go back home because there's nothing at home. We can't earn as much as we earn in Russia, so we better stay in Russia. And then I was like, who is going to take you? Who is going to exchange you, excuse me? Because you are Uzbek citizens, you're not Russian citizens. So obviously the Uzbek government would have to interfere, but Ukrainians are not going to exchange you just because. They have to bring Ukrainians, POWs from Russia back home. I was like, would you consider being sent to Uzbekistan? And they both said no, because we're going to be jailed, because it's a criminal offense in Uzbekistan if you go and fight in a as a part of, some sort of army, which is not Uzbek army. So they're going to be jailed. So they said, no, we want to go back to Russia. I'm like, if you go back to Russia, you understand, you sign a contract, you're going to be sent back again, and this time you're definitely going to be dead. Isn't it better to go back home and serve your sentence and be alive? They smiled. And I found it very disheartening. Mm-hmm. Because I know some other cases of Uzbek prisoners of war and Tajiks, because I watch this YouTube channel all the time, that some of them didn't understand when they were signing the contract what they're signing, and most of them are scared. I saw the interview with a young lad from Uzbekistan who is POW in Ukraine, and his life is finished. He is going to be sent back. And the trick with Russian passport is just a big fat lie, I really want to see at least one migrant who actually came back from the war and received Russian citizenship. Given the fact what Bastrykin, head of Russia's investigative committee, is saying, they don't have any intention. Because the racism and towards migrants, if you check Russian Telegram channels and X, formerly known as Twitter, and social videos, the hatred towards migrants is incredible. I mean, they are accused in all deadly scenes, in raping, in murdering, in doing all sorts of bad stuff. Drugs trafficking, actually, this is what Alexander Bastrykin accuses them from. He says that because of migrants, more drugs are coming to Russia than before. Seriously. Give me the numbers. So all deadly scenes. And what is more concerning is that now we have this Russian nationalist, I call them battalions, called Ruskaya Druzhina. I don't know how to translate it into English,
Yeah, like Russian crews.
Yeah, Russian crews, yes. And these are kind of voluntary organizations made of ultra-nationalists, basically bandits, who, for whatever reason, have a right to raid places where migrants work and arrest them. Based on what? They closely work with the Russian police, because when I see this video that they publish everything on their Telegram channels. I mean, I'm not revealing something new. They open about it. So they storm with their balaclavas, with the special chevrons, so they have uniform. They storm these warehouses where migrants work, arrest them, and there's next to the warehouse, there's a police van ready to get them. And that's how they got to the police station. And then the next thing, documents check, this, that, sign the contract. It's really, it's insane. And after that, they're saying that they're, not Nazis in Ukraine. No, the way they behave, this is beyond Nazis. This is terrible. It's hard to watch these videos. I tell you, they just storm and they lay everyone down. They strip them naked. They check them. It's inhuman and baseless. They don't give any papers saying, okay, we have an order to check this warehouse. No, they just storm.
One of those videos recently made headlines across Central Asia. And in June, Uzbekistan's foreign ministry urged Russia to treat its citizens with respect. Kyrgyzstan has also protested against the mistreatment of its people in Russia. What does that show us? Do you think that Central Asian countries are becoming a bit more like defiant vis-a-vis Moscow? Because such protests, I mean, these protests were pretty strong this time around.
Yes, I agree. Especially Kyrgyzstan's response took me by surprise because I never expected them. Normally, whatever happens to migrants, Central Asian governments just ignore, pretend it didn't happen because they don't want to show an act of defiance to Russia. But this was quite remarkable. I hope they're standing on their feet and actually making themselves heard. Long overdue, but nevertheless important. And of course, what's happening with Azerbaijan at the moment, what happened to this 11, I think, people, the Azeris.
Could we remind the listeners what happened?
A week ago or so, FSB detained a group of Azeri nationals who lived in Russia on the charges of them being involved in some sort of murders in early 2000s. Now, they detained these people, and two of them died while in police detention. And it looked like they died because of severe beatings. To be perfectly honest, when I saw the rest in the courtroom, I thought they didn't look good either. So immediately, Azerbaijan protested in a very, very loud way. Russian interim ambassador was called to see the foreign ministry. Immediately, all Russian cultural events were cancelled in Azerbaijan. The bodies of those two deceased, President Aliyev demanded them being brought to Azerbaijan, and they did. And then a group of Russian citizens who live in Azerbaijan was detained, severely beaten, and accused in drug smuggling and espionage. Tit-tat-tat. The situation got even worse because as of yesterday, both countries introduced visa regimes. So you can't really travel from Baku to Moscow without Russian visa and vice versa. And that was something unprecedented, the reaction. But I was glad it happened because finally somebody should really stood up and say, you cannot treat our people like this. You just absolutely can't. Russia cannot survive without migrants. I mean, they can say whatever they want. They're not going to sweep the streets, clean the toilets, and build the buildings. They won't. So who is going to do that? Who is going to work in their markets, in bazaars? Bring all these vegetables and fruits. So treat these people with respect, and respect they don't have and never did. Partly because, as you mentioned earlier yourself, it's probably a post-colonial thing. But I think it's deeply inherited in them because if you look, they talk with disrespect to any of the neighbors except Chinese. Everyone is bad. The idea of supreme nation is so engraved in their psyche that they don't understand that they have to treat people properly. People who actually came there to work and they don't take their job places. They're just filling in the gaps. I was told recently my conversation with one Russian person saying, oh, you know what? Now they're all Uber, like the Russian Yandex Taxi, right? Drivers. Most of them are the Central Asians. We're the Russians. I'm like, maybe people call up Central Asian drivers because they simply don't drink. And when you get a taxi, you really don't want to have a drunk driver. So perhaps this is the reason they're employed. Maybe.
Uzbekistan, well, after Russia invaded Ukraine, around 100,000 Uzbek migrants returned home temporarily because firstly the ruble fell, so obviously it wasn't as profitable to earn in rubles anymore, and secondly probably fearing conscription. And this is when Uzbekistan started looking for other places to send migrants to. And one of them is Poland. So Poland in the recent years has seen a huge increase of Uzbek migrants, and most of them work as taxi drivers or on construction in factories. I spoke to a few of those people, and some of them used to work in Russia. And what they all say is that, firstly, the earnings are better because, Russian ruble obviously has recently rose in value, but it's still, it's still low compared to what it used to be before the war. And secondly, they said that in Poland, even though, obviously Poland is by far not the most tolerant country, out there, but still it's much less racist than Russia. So, so I can see that Uzbekistan might have some sort of reason to be a little bit more defiant towards Moscow than it used to be, right? Because there are some other options. Obviously, they aren't as popular, but we can see that Uzbekistan is signing agreements with the UK, with Canada, with Germany to send migrants there. So maybe this is one of the reasons that Uzbekistan is actually standing up to Moscow. Like, what do you think? And what do you think about Kyrgyzstan?
I think that no matter how much loyalty Uzbek government and Uzbek leadership is showing to Russia, deep inside, they don't like the way Uzbeks are treated over there in Russia, and they're resentful about it. And I really welcome the developments that the foreign ministry is doing, trying to find alternative places for Uzbeks to work, and it's really good. I had a conversation with one of the representatives of the foreign ministry of Uzbekistan, and he said they're working really hard to diversify the scheme and sign agreement. And you mentioned Poland. We have migrant workers here in the UK who come for half a year and then go back another half a year. And I was told that a lot of people want to come because they paid on time, they paid in hard currency, and they're happy. Of course, some of them violate the rule and they stay and become illegal migrants here, and I know a couple of them, but I think the majority go back home. And this is great because they have nothing to do in Russia. In Russia, you're going to be forced to fight. And Uzbeks understand this is not our war. So which is great. Kyrgyzstan, I know, is also developing the same schemes. At least I know for the UK where I live, the scheme works for the agricultural works with Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan. I don't know about other countries, but in the airports, I see a lot of people. Sometimes I know that Kyrgyz, they speak Kyrgyz, and the group of people, obviously, there's agricultural workers that are going back home, which is nice. And I think it's good overall for them to see other places, to see different countries, different cultures, learn, rather than go to Russia and be treated badly and, beaten up and etc. So, it's very good.
Do you know what's going to happen to the two Uzbek men you met online, but who are now prisoners of war in Ukraine?
I raised this issue confidentially with the Uzbek foreign ministry. They have their names. What to do with them is not my job to discuss with anyone, because if they're gonna be included in the list of POWs exchange, they're gonna go back to Russia. How likely Russia is going to take them is unlikely, because they're taking their own guys first. Exchanges, thanks to God, exchanges are becoming more frequent, and I'm very happy that Ukrainian soldiers are coming back home from terrible conditions and terrible torture they're suffering in Russia. So Russians are not willing to, first of all, they have a hard time taking the ethnic minorities from Ukrainian captivity, okay? Secondly, and if they do so with their own people, ethnic minorities, how likely do you think they're going to exchange, they're going to take the Uzbeks? Unlikely. So it's up to Uzbekistan's government to discuss it with the Russians or discuss it with the Ukrainians. I know that if Uzbekistan takes them back, they're definitely going to serve prison sentence, for sure. Minimum 5 years, I think it's even 10. If Russia is taking them, they're going to be sent back to war. However, they have a third option. They can stay in the captivity till the end of the war. The three options are available, whichever. And I have I cannot trace down what will happen to them, or maybe it happened already. Because, in Uzbekistan, when the story of Uzbeks fighting in Ukraine on behalf of Russians came out, it was a big shame for the government of Uzbekistan. And they tried to calm it down, silenced people who wrote about it, but this is the fact. And the more you try to keep quiet about it, the more the story is going to come up. They have to deal with it, either with propaganda work within the Uzbek migrants in Russia, telling them not to sign military contract and tell how they are, provide workplaces outside of Russia, which they do, but importantly, to have some sort of communication with the Ukrainian authorities about those guys in captivity. I know probably, 100 or so are there, and take them back home.
Let's go back to Bahrom's Hamroyev and his situation. So he has been placed in Vladimirsky Central prison, which is known for awful conditions and for mistreatment of prisoners. Can you tell us if we know anything more about his situation, about the conditions in prison, and what can be done to actually help him?
Right. He was sent to Vladimirsky Central, Vladimir prison, which is known to be one of the worst prisons in Russia. So he spent there 2 years, and his health condition deteriorated quite badly because he's got diabetes, and very often he was denied the medicine. He was then taken to the medical facility where he was, according to his wife, Zuhra, he was injected some sort of whatever he was injected, we don't know. She doesn't know. He wasn't told, which gave him terrible rash across his body. The next thing, they cannot keep him in Vladimir prison forever, so they have to send him to, like, as we know in Russian, Colonia, as a prison settlement, basically. As we speak now, he is in the process of transfer. Once he reaches this prison settlement, the Colonia, things are going to be a bit easier for him. But the transfer process is very dangerous, because to me, it's clear that FSB or whoever else, they want to kill him. They have done it repeatedly, and I think they want to finish with him. That's why I think they were injecting him God knows what. The transfer from one prison to another is a very tricky thing, because while you're in the transfer, it takes sometimes weeks. Yeah? They stop, you go to another prison for a couple of days, and then back in a train, and off you go again. So to monitor every single step is mission impossible. You just don't know. And this is the most, how can I say it? It's a dark thing. You don't know where he is. You don't know who he's with. How is he treated? And his wife is a very courageous woman. She's really trying hard to figure out at which step of transfer he is, but it's impossible. So I think we will be only able to breathe when he reaches the final destination and prison settlement. And we all believe things are going to be easier there. Because the worst thing is when you sit in the Vladimir prison, which is a closed prison, and during the transfer. And so as we speak, we don't know at which stage of the transfer he's now at the moment. Nevertheless, in October this year, Bahrom is going to be 60 years old, God willing, and his health is not good at all. He was beaten up several times by FSB while he was, not in prison yet, during his work life, and he was badly beaten up in Vladimir prison by the head of the prison himself, just because Bahrom insists to be called political prisoner. And he is helping other prisoners as well, teaching them rights, etc., which is obviously not welcomed by the prison authorities. And he's not going to change. He's always going to be the same. And therefore, his disobedience, so to speak, causes irritation. Bahrom absolutely should be included in the exchange list of Russian political prisoners onto something else. I know that everyone is now talking about the big exchange coming up. I think, and I can be wrong, I may not be wrong, I don't know the conditions of the exchange, what somebody is going to give in exchange to Russian political prisoners. Could be, Russian POWs in Ukrainian captivity, I don't know. But everyone is talking about this big exchange, and I really hope, not only hope, and try to get Bahrom's name on the list. And that's why I made this film, just to raise his profile, because over the years, he's done a lot of good work for people who are voiceless, migrants and persecuted Muslims. And there is a degree of racism in treating him by the Russian opposition, Russian human rights defenders, just because he's Uzbek. It doesn't mean anything. He needs to be out. He needs to be free. So, yes, and I, in the process of negotiating with someone in European Parliament, making a screening there, and raise his profile as much as possible, because we need to get him out before Russian authorities decide to kill him.
Is there anything that our listeners can do to support your work or to support Bahrom's release?
I would really appreciate if people spread at least the trailer of the film and, spread it on social networks as crazy as possible, and tag Russian human rights defenders who are outside of Russia, like Oleg Orlov, chairman of Memorial Human Rights Center, Ilya Yashin, Vladimir Karamurza. Tag them everywhere, and maybe tag, spread this information to your local MPs, members of parliament, and human rights organizations in your countries, begging people to, look at Bahrom's case. I know there are a lot of Russian political prisoners now. I know the young kids and girls and etc. But this guy has been working relentlessly for over 30 years, and he shouldn't be there where he is now.
This is what we'll be doing. Thank you, Shahida, so much. And for our listeners, once again, Spirit Untamed on Current Time is a film by Shahida, which I will include in the body of today's newsletter. Thank you so much, Shahida, and all the best to you.
Thank you for inviting, and thank you for the attention to this topic. It was really important for me to raise the issue of the migrants and the war and Bahrom.
Thanks so much. That's it for today. Thank you for listening, and please subscribe to Turan Tales on Substack. I look forward to meeting you there and on my newsletter's social media.